The following Pharma Essentia podcast is intended for informational and educational purposes only and cannot be considered as medical advice. Please speak to a healthcare professional before making any treatment decisions.
Hey Josh.
Hey Kay.
And hello listeners, welcome back to the PV Pod.
The 6th episode of season 2. Can you even believe
Stories
it?
from the Marrow.
I mean, I just can't believe how many episodes we've done, isn't it?
A podcast about polycythemia vera.
Don't you think it's just like so many episodes?
Brought to you by Pharma Essentia.
Ooh, thanks Pharma Essentia.
Thanks for letting me get through that intro, Josh. I wanted to do something different with today's episode, so it felt important to keep the intro business as usual.
Ooh, what's different about today's episode?
Well, we usually start with an extremely funny bit written by yours truly that somehow relates to the topic of the episode.
Extremely funny is a little bit of a stretch, but hey, sometimes I write them too.
But today, I wanted to start with a story.
All right, I'm game for that. What's the story?
My name is Al Freedman, Dr. Al Freedman. I am coming to you live from picturesque Northbrook, Illinois, outside of Chicago. I am a practicing psychologist, and I specialize in supporting the needs of patients and families affected by rare diseases of all sorts all over the world.
Oh, okay. Really cool. I bet Dr. Freedman is going to have a lot of interesting things to say to us today. But no offense, that wasn't really a story. It was more of like an introduction.
An introduction to the story.
Ah, yes.
I'm also a dad. I have a daughter who's 25 years old named Kara, and she works full-time at NORD, the National Organization of Rare Disorders. And she comes to that work, and I come to my specialization because of my son, Jack, Kara's brother, who was born in 1995 and diagnosed as an infant with spinal muscular atrophy, a rare neuromuscular disease.
I wanted to let Dr. Freedman tell his son's story. As you heard, Jack didn't have PV, but he had a rare disease, which forever changed the lives of Dr. Freedman and his family.
I was finishing my PhD in counseling psychology from the University of Wisconsin in Madison, where baby Jack was born in 1995 at the very tail end of my clinical training to become a psychologist. Jack was diagnosed with spinal muscular atrophy after just a routine 6-month check-in at the pediatrician. So we had, on a Friday, a healthy 6-month-old baby, and by Tuesday, we were told our healthy 6-month-old baby was gonna not live another year because of an untreatable, an incurable neuromuscular disease. So our world flipped upside down 30 years ago. This was 1995, and I was a brand new psychologist who needed one very quickly because of the trauma of being told our baby wasn't gonna live very long.
Oh my gosh, I can't imagine what that must have been like.
So, while Dr. Freedman doesn't have PV, nor is he a caregiver to someone with PV, he's all too familiar with rare disease and the devastating impact it can have on your life.
Baby Jack was given a year to live in 1995, and thankfully he didn't fully cooperate with his prognosis. He lived to the age of 26, and I was very lucky to be his dad and have him here with us for so long.
Man, I'm so sorry to hear that Jack is no longer with us, but he must have been a really extraordinary person to be able to beat his prognosis like that.
And throughout Jack's life, Dr. Freedman learned a lot about living with a rare disease and caring for someone with a rare disease.
He went through a lot in and out of the hospital, a lot of challenges medically, had a wheelchair and a ventilator and a feeding tube and nursing care in the house, but he was happy, and he taught me a lot, and he taught everybody else a lot whose paths he crossed. And as Jack grew up, my practice increasingly focused on other families facing adversity because of medical conditions or rare diseases. And over the course of my 30-year career as a psychologist, my specialization has grown and increasingly focused on the rare population. And most recently, because of the pandemic, my license to practice is now good in 42 states because of a interstate compact for PhD psychologists that existed before the pandemic, but because of the pandemic, there was an increase in the number of states who joined the compact. So almost the whole country is now available in this compact, and families all over the country are finding me, and I'm able to meet the needs of families who find themselves in these unusual situations with rare diseases of all sorts.
I'm feeling a lot of gratitude to Dr. Freedman for sharing that story with us and for joining us today on the podcast. So we often talk about the mental health ramifications of living with a rare disease, and Dr. Freedman is not only a trained expert, but a lived experience expert as well. This is going to be a fantastic conversation.
Agreed. We're going to dive into our discussion with Dr. Freedman right after this quick break.
So you're learning about PV on the PV Pod, Stories from the Marrow. Now get ready to take the next steps on your PV journey with What's Next PV, an educational site on everything polycythemia vera.
Knowing what's next can help inform the decisions you and your doctor make about the future and is important to your health. What's Next PV can help you understand test results, set goals for the management of your PV, and make a plan to advocate for yourself. Check out www.whatsnextpv.com to learn more.
And we are back.
And you stuck around.
Before the break, we heard Dr. Freedman's story about his son, Jack, who was diagnosed with a terminal rare disease at birth. His son's prognosis shaped Dr. Freedman's life, of course, but also his career as he moved towards working as a psychologist for families dealing with rare disease.
Right off the bat, I want to ask Dr. Freedman about the impacts of a rare disease on a person's own mental health. As we've learned more about PV and what it's like living with PV, we've heard a lot of common themes like increased isolation and feelings of overwhelming helplessness, which in turn can trigger depression in the face of a life-changing diagnosis. I'd love to hear Dr. Freedman's perspective on all of that and if he has anything else to add.
Well, obviously, having any kind of disease can't help people and their mental health. Having a rare disease like PV only makes things harder. And the reason for that is it's not something a patient expects.
That's a really good point. Our guests in the past have often brought up that initial disorienting shock from their diagnosis.
It's something that intrudes on day-to-day functioning, intrudes on relationships and work and family and the things that people want to do. My son's diagnosis certainly intruded on our family and our lives. For all those 26 years, we had to do things differently than other people all the time. And we had to live, and patients always have to live with a lot of uncertainty because sometimes symptoms come up unexpectedly and we can't know what the future will hold. It's a hard way to live when you don't know what the future will hold. And none of us know what the future will hold, but when you have a rare disease, it throws everything up into the air. And that experience of living with uncertainty is something that's common for all patients with rare diseases. And the patients I met and work with who had PV certainly experience a lot of uncertainty and a need to adjust to changing conditions with all the interaction with the medical system and the symptoms and the challenges that can come. It's not an easy way to live.
This kind of uncertainty is so common when it comes to receiving a life-changing diagnosis. I hope our listeners find it affirming to know that they aren't alone. I mean, Dr. Freedman even refers to it as common.
I appreciate that, how Dr. Freedman acknowledges that it's not an easy way to live. It doesn't make it any easier, but I think it's important to recognize how hard it is, especially when so many people living with PV are dismissed because it's spoken about as the good cancer.
That's a really good point, Josh.
Hey, did you ask Dr. Freedman about that at all? Has he dealt with any of his patients feeling like their concerns are being diminished or dismissed? I'd love to hear his thoughts on that. That's a really interesting perspective. It can be incredibly challenging to figure out the right thing to say in sensitive situations like this.
I'm not a cancer specialist, but I know enough to know that no cancer is a good cancer.
Can I get an amen?
And I know also that I think as a psychologist, Kay, the reason that people make these comments is because they don't know what to say. So people are well-intended, but people become uncomfortable when they hear about a rare disease that's life-threatening or could be life-threatening. And people are well-intentioned, and sometimes people take a step back because they don't want to say or do the wrong thing, which then leads patients and family members to feel more isolated, more alone. So it's not a bad thing when people stick with us and actually converse with us instead of running away or holding back because they're afraid they'll say the wrong thing.
It's a really interesting perspective. It can be incredibly challenging to figure out the right thing to say in sensitive situations like this.
It's definitely not great to have your feelings dismissed or diminished, but it is important to remember that your community does want to support you, and sometimes they just don't know how.
Sometimes well-intentioned comments don't feel supportive to rare disease patients. And I think it's important for us affected by rare disease to remind ourselves that rare disease isn't rare to us, but it's rare to everybody else. So that person who might make that comment that feels a little insensitive, it's simply not having any experience. It's not a willful or intentional comment to minimize the condition that you have. It's just they don't know, but they're trying. So we have to do our best as rare disease patients and caregivers. And you get the hang of this as you get more experience. Again, my son lived to 26, so in a lot of years, I couldn't think of it this way when he was little, but I could as I got experience, understanding what it's like to be in the other person's shoes who is interacting with us in an unusual situation. People are well-intended, and we sometimes need to take the high road and take the high road by keeping in check the feelings we have about that comment on the surface and understand at a deeper level that the person who's talking with us does care and is well-intended but doesn't know what to do or say. So we sometimes have to kind of lead them there.
Sometimes a change in perspective can be really helpful in handling these comments that might come across as kind of hurtful or dismissive.
Okay, I want to jump back a bit. We've already heard so much great stuff from Dr. Freedman, and I want to make sure that we cover everything, the whole PV journey. So I'm wondering if Dr. Freedman said anything about the initial diagnosis. Guests in the past have told us their diagnosis stories, and they're always incredibly emotional. Did Dr. Freedman discuss those first few moments and how to handle them from a mental health perspective?
As a practicing psychologist in rare disease, I can tell you that the mental health needs of newly diagnosed patients and their family members are very unique. And when I facilitate groups for rare disease patients, newly diagnosed patients need to have their own place in their own group because being new is so scary. The experience for many people begins psychologically as a trauma because for many patients it takes time to get a diagnosis. It's like getting launched into the twilight zone. It's like there's your life before a diagnosis of rare disease and your life after. And they're two different worlds you're living in. So I equate it to being launched into a twilight zone where very few other people are.
I really like that description, and not just because I love the Twilight Zone, but he's totally right. So many stories about patients receiving a new diagnosis include this moment of fear and disorientation. Dr. Freedman's right. It can be traumatic.
And that experience is scary and it's disorienting, and your whole world is flipped upside down. It's not something that you planned for. It's not something that you choose when you're affected by a rare disease, but it's something that happens. So it takes time. It takes time to reacclimate to what I call the twilight zone of rare, this unusual experience. And everybody's different in terms of how long it takes, and everybody's different in terms of what people need in order to become reoriented.
That's important to remember as well. Everyone's different. Your response to this shocking, confusing, or even traumatic diagnosis might be different than the guests we've had on this show or other stories you've heard, and that's normal.
Does Dr. Freedman have any advice for managing your mental health while receiving a diagnosis and for living with the rare disease afterwards?
There's so much about having a rare disease that's not in a patient's control and not in a family's control. So what I encourage patients and families to do is to focus on the things that we can control. What can we control? Oftentimes we can control our treatment regimen, how we take care of ourselves, make sure we get enough nutrition, enough sleep, exercise as we're able to get exercise. We're able to control that we're part of a community of other people who face these challenges. We're able to control how much we get ourselves out into the world and have lives that include things in addition to our rare disease so that people aren't only identify as somebody with a rare disease. People who have rare diseases who stay mentally healthy and happy and balanced usually have many other things in their lives that they can focus on and that they can control and exert influence over in the face of a medical condition where patients often lack full control over an outcome.
Wow, that's exactly what I was looking for. This feels like one of those suggestions that applies to everyone, not just people living with PV.
I agree. I sometimes struggle with chronic anxiety, which is often triggered by a feeling of a lack of control, and keeping myself actively engaged in hobbies really helps.
What's true for us, for everybody, is true for people with rare disease. It's that much more important to have a variety of experiences when you have something that can bog you down to this degree.
No wonder so many of our guests have awesome hobbies. Did Dr. Freedman have any other suggestions for dealing with the mental health ramifications of PV? I know a lot of people living with a rare disease diagnosis can feel somewhat isolated or alone. Does he see that often in the patients that he works with?
Isolation is a very common experience amongst PV patients and patients with rare diseases all over the world. Uncertainty and isolation are the two experiences that cut across rare diseases, cut across cultures, countries. Everybody in rare disease experiences this or has a risk of feeling isolated. And that's for obvious reasons. In a rare disease, people don't understand you feel alone because it is so rare. It's not rare to us who have a rare disease or a family member with a rare disease, but it's rare to everybody else. And it's very hard to explain to other people what you're going through and the medical stuff. And it's especially hard when people have never heard of the condition. Most people haven't heard of PV. Most people haven't heard of any of the condition that I work with communities and patients. So isolation is common, and it's also common because of physical limitations that many people have and medical fragility that some people have. So isolation can come at you from different directions. And it's so important to fight against isolation by being connected.
So, if you're feeling alone, well, you're not alone in that feeling. Here's what Dr. Freedman suggests for managing those feelings of isolation.
I think most patients find it really helpful to connect with their rare communities. And the PV community that I had met with in person not long ago was very strong and very supportive of each other. As a dad, I was terrified. If I had thought too far ahead about the future when they told me my baby wasn't going to live very long, I would never have gotten out of bed in the morning. And what helped me was to connect with others who had faced similar challenges. And what helps rare disease patients with PV and other conditions is to connect with the communities and find others who've walked the path that they're walking. I'm still indebted to people who were role models to me 30 years ago when I was a scared young dad, and through their words and actions and how they managed to overcome the adversity and the challenges that came with the diagnosis. You see some amazing people who carry themselves with a lot of grace and dignity. And when you're a new patient or caregiver in rare disease, you look up to these people. So you learn to move from a place of fear to a place of hope. And then ultimately, 30 years later, I say a place of love. And so when you're in a place of fear and you see people who have the same set of conditions that they're facing that are very difficult and challenging and complex, and you see how they do it, then you tell yourself, well, maybe I can do it too. And when I was a young, scared dad, that's how I moved from that place of fear to a place of hope, because I saw people and met people and got to know people who role modeled for me that I could do it. There were a number of adults with the condition my son had who were happy and were stable medically and had jobs and had partners and had productive lives, and they communicated in their words and actions that could be possible for my family too. And I saw this in person with the PV community, everybody being supportive, teaching each other what they knew and teaching each other by their behavior and their actions how to conduct themselves. It's extraordinary to move between groups of patients with rare diseases and continue in my role to see so much kindness and compassion and mutual support between members of the community. The first thing I do when I support a patient who's newly diagnosed is to encourage them to connect with their community when they're working, because those are the people who really get and can help orient the patient to the new world that they're unaccustomed to and understandably scared about in the beginning, just as I was.
Connection, community, role models, support groups, they're so important in navigating PV. Needing support isn't a weakness, it's natural.
I appreciate how Dr. Freedman calls his mentors heroes. They really are. Like he said, support and guidance from people who have been through what you're going through is critical throughout your entire journey with PV.
He reiterated this about people who've just been diagnosed as well, how important it is for them to find their community.
Connecting with other people who've been launched into that same twilight zone can be very, very empowering. The group of PV patients I met with recently included a couple of patients who had been recently diagnosed. And their experience being in the room was very different than the patients who'd been diagnosed for years. And what I see over and over again are experienced people kind of taking it in under their wing, the people who were new and scared, and helping them to feel less scared and to feel supported by sharing their knowledge of the medical condition, the knowledge of the professionals, the doctors who take care of them, and their strategies for how to get used to the changes that they need to make to take care of themselves medically. In those interactions with other people, people who are new become less scared. And basically the message that I offer as a psychologist is the same message I was offered as a scared dad 30 years ago, which is, you can do this. You can move forward. Your life isn't over. It's going to be a different journey than the one that you expected. You can do this. Because at first you don't think you can. If someone had told me what was going to happen to our baby before his diagnosis, I would have said, I won't be able to handle that. Like, lock me up in a rubber room now, I won't be able to handle it. And over again, what I see with my patients is the same thing I saw in myself, which is you're able to handle more than you think you can, but you don't know that in the beginning. You're too much in shock with the uncertainty that comes with the diagnosis and the journey that's ahead. So it takes time. It takes managing the basics, meaning food and sleep and exercise. You'd be surprised as a psychologist, a lot of complicated things come my way from people don't call me when things are going well. They call me when things are not going well, including people who have a new diagnosis. And you'd be surprised at how many problems can be solved by paying attention to nutrition, to sleep, and to exercise. Those three things. And so people who are newly diagnosed, or have family members who are newly diagnosed, just as I was 30 years ago, you lose sleep because your mind is all over the place, and you're thrown out of your routines when you're dealing with doctor's appointments in hospitals and healthcare systems. So it makes it harder to sleep. It makes it harder to eat, and it makes it harder for me personally. It was running. For 30 years, I've ran 5 miles every other day, and you leave those routines and you don't take care of yourself, then it's much harder to function. As a psychologist, I always start with those basics, as well as reassurance and trying to instill into people who are scared that it is possible to meet the challenges that are ahead of you. I didn't think so when I was a new dad in this situation with a baby recently diagnosed, but others helped me to see that in myself. It took time. It's possible. Anything is possible.
Dr. Freedman's full of great advice. I really loved his story about people who have been recently diagnosed with PV getting assistance from people who have more experience. That really highlights the benefits of attending things like the PV in Focus events we talk about sometimes.
Which you can learn more about at pvinfocus.com. There are a few upcoming live events in October and November all over the country.
Chicago, Southern California, Houston. These events are such a great opportunity to get connected with PV communities near you. Check out pvinfocus.com for more details and to sign up. And if you see me there, say hi.
Josh, it doesn't surprise me to hear that people who are further along in their PV journey are helping people who've been more recently diagnosed. All of our guests have been so open in sharing their stories to do exactly that, to get the word out and let people who've just been diagnosed know they aren't alone.
I'm wondering if Dr. Freedman had any advice specifically for caregivers to people who've been diagnosed with PV, especially when it comes to mental health challenges.
What I had said a few minutes ago about eating, sleeping, and exercise, I was actually thinking of me as a caregiver and some of the other caregivers, spouses, partners, parents of kids with rare diseases, and family members of people with PV. We all have to do what we need to do to take care of ourselves, and it's awfully hard to do when we're taking care of somebody else. It's important that we have extra help if we need it to take care of the patient and our family. It's hard to do to have other people get involved in our lives and to be in our homes if that's necessary. Hopefully it isn't necessary, but when it is, it's important to allow other people to help us, even if that means a couple hours so we can get out and do something else. Sleep, food, and exercise are the key things, and being able to, just as I said about the patient, him or herself, caregivers too need to have a life that's filled with things other than caregiving in order to stay healthy. So anytime caregivers can take a break from caregiving, whether it's through work or hobbies or exercise or socialization, many caregivers feel guilty stepping away from their caregiving duties, but it's really important for us caregivers to put fuel in our tanks, because we know that we're going to use a lot of emotional fuel and physical fuel in our caregiving responsibility. So we don't refuel, we're not going to have enough to provide to the loved one that we're taking care of.
You have to take care of yourself to be able to take care of your loved ones. That's great advice.
I feel like so much of this episode has revolved around the importance of accepting help, so I just have to reiterate this again. Needing help does not mean you're weak. It's natural and even necessary in navigating your journey with PV and in caring for someone with PV.
Honestly, Kay, I don't have anything to add. Dr. Freedman has done such a great job highlighting the mental health challenges people living with PV might face and offering solutions to help them out.
Agreed. Just to make sure we didn't miss any other helpful gems, I asked Dr. Freedman if there was anything else he wanted to add before signing off.
The last thing to share is simply anything is possible. To stay as hopeful as you can in the face of these challenges, and know that there are plenty of positives too. It's not easy. Having a rare disease isn't easy. Being a caregiver is not easy. Everyone starts in a place of fear. And again, I wish for all that are listening to this podcast that you're able to move from a place of fear to a place of hope. Along with the rare disease also come some rare and unanticipated gifts. It's not all bad every day. And I saw that so many other patients and the families affected by rare disease have taught me about unusual gifts of perspective. Everybody else's big problems are our small problems. A gift of resilience, gift of creativity. We have to do things differently than everybody else, and we get very creative. Gift of compassion. My son and so many others are magnets for really wonderful, open-hearted people that enter our lives that we wouldn't have met otherwise. I could go on and on, but my message is enjoy every day. Every day is a gift, and discover also some of the rare and unusual gifts that come with such a rare condition and all the challenges that come with it. I hope that helps.
That was amazing. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Freedman. I'm so moved by Jack's story, and I'm sure our listeners are too.
And for his valuable insight as a psychologist assisting people living with rare diseases. So often, mental health challenges go unspoken or unaddressed, and I'm so glad we could have Dr. Freedman on today to shed some light on them.
Agreed.
As always, thank you, listeners, for tuning in to another fantastic episode of the PV Pod.
Stories from the Marrow. See you next time.
The PV Pod, Stories from the Marrow, is produced by Believe Limited and Bloodstream Media, and made possible thanks to our sponsor, Pharma Essentia. The PV Pod is hosted by me, Kay Vermeil, and my co-host, Josh Bragg. If you like the show, please share it with anyone for whom it might make a difference, and leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. We'll see you next time.